Hi, this is National Master Dan Heisman, and we're continuing with our series of instructional videos to help everybody improve their chess. And today I'm going to talk about what I call the three types of different chess visions. And some of these names are standard, and at least one of them is Dan Heisman name, but other people have used the same thing and called it different names. So let's talk about the three types. The first type I call board vision. That's the one where that's my name. Board vision is the ability to look at a chessboard statically, meaning the position that's in front of you. You don't have to look ahead or see how the pieces move. You just look at the chessboard and you see what's happening on the board. You can see the material, you can see the king safety, you can see the pawn structure. That's board vision. I heard another author use the exact same thing and he called it chess vision, except that seems like a strange term because all types of vision involving chess are chess visions. So I'd rather call chess vision to mean all the types of visions, and this particular one I call board vision. The second type of vision most people call your tactical vision. Your tactical vision is your ability to look at a board and determine what are some of the dangerous ideas for either side that might get one side or the other a loss of material or a gain of material or checkmate. So you're looking at the board and you're seeing tactical ideas. Now I have an earlier video called The Seeds of Tactical Destruction, where you statically look at the board and you say, what's wrong with one side's position, let's say your opponent's position, and how can you take advantage of that? Well, seeing what's wrong with this position of the Seeds of Tactical Destruction and seeing how you might take advantage of that is your tactical vision. Although you could certainly say your ability to see the seeds of tactical destruction is part of your tactical vision. In that sense, tactical vision is both static and dynamic. The static shows the possibilities on the board. The dynamic says, if I move the pieces, can I achieve what I think might be possible? So tactical vision is static and dynamic. Visualization is the famous third type of third type of chess vision. Visualization is the ability to keep track of the pieces as you move them around in your head as you're analyzing the position. So if you say, if I go there and he goes there and I go there and he goes there, what's happening now? Of course, unless you're playing correspondence chess, you can't move the pieces. You have to visualize them in your head as to where they are. That's called visualization. Obviously, by definition, visualization is entirely dynamic. It completely involves moving the pieces. It's not where the pieces are now. Now, when you're visualizing ahead and only 3 pieces have moved, all the other pieces on the board are still where they are now. So in the sense, you can combine your board vision with the pieces that you know move to create your visualization. But in any sense, we would like to think of visualization as being completely dynamic. Okay, a lot of people have asked me, how do I improve my visualization? Most people who are good at visualization do not get there by doing visualization exercises, although such things exist in abundance. What they do is they just play lots and lots and lots of slow games, and they practice visualizing on every move. I have a lot of my students who think a slow game is a 15-minute game online, and when you play a 15-minute game, if you're playing 40 moves in 15 minutes, that's about 20 or 25 seconds a move. You're not going to be able to move the pieces in your head very much, maybe just a little bit, maybe on a few of the moves. So your visualization is going to suffer greatly. When I started, I played mostly 50 moves in 2 hours, so I had over 2 minutes per move, almost 2.5 minutes a move, and that meant if you sat there and you looked on every move and took a lot of time, you were doing a lot more visualization. So people who play these really slow games, like at the World Open or at the US Open or at any big tournament, they're playing slow time limits. And if you take your time and use almost all your time every game, as you should according to your good time management, if you're doing it right, you'd be visualizing. Now, I have some of my students, they take their time, but they don't visualize. They just hand wave, hand wave, hand wave. They look at a position and they say, maybe I should move my queen to this side of the board. Maybe I should push my pawns. Maybe I should do this. Maybe I should do that. They don't actually sit there and go through sequences. Like if you listen to my 20-minute exercise or my games against the computer, that's not what I'm doing. I'm saying if I play knight d4 and he plays knight takes d4 and I play e takes d4 and he plays knight g6, is that good for me or not? I'm moving those pieces in my head and I'm visualizing. And that's what you need to do to practice your visualization. But there's other ways to get good at visualization. In his book, Studying Chess Made Easy, Grandmaster Andy Soltis has a visualization exercise that you can do with a friend. And if you Google chess visualization exercises, or you go to my website, danheisman.com, and you go under my More pull-down menu and go to my links page, I think, or my chess training page maybe, I have links to several pages which have visualization, but you could just Google chess visualization exercises, and there's a whole bunch of websites that are dedicated to this. Some of them charge you, some of them are free. I tell people, go to those websites, figure out which ones are fun, because if they're fun, they're probably going to be more helpful to you because you'll be able to do it more. Try to figure out which ones are fun, which ones are helpful, and you could use those websites if that's what you want to do to practice that. But in the long run, playing slow games, playing the moves slowly, and visualizing them on each move is the way to go. Okay, so let's pick out some examples of the three types of visions. I have a game here from the World Cup. I kind of picked at random between Mamedyarov and, if I can pronounce his name, Rakotomaharo. And I just picked out move 15. So let's see what we can see with our three visions. The first vision is board vision. Board vision will first look at the material. It looks like both sides have the same amount of material, queen, 2 rooks, all 4 minor pieces, and 6 pawns. My board vision tells me that white has 2 pawn islands and black has 3 pawn islands. Black has an isolated d-pawn as one of his 3 pawn islands, so he's got an isolated pawn. Both kings look relatively safe. I don't see any pieces that are about to be trapped. That's partly board vision, partly tactical vision. I've got some nice open diagonals for all the bishops. The knights are on pretty good squares. The rooks are not doing very much right now, so both sides are going to need to develop their queen and get their rooks into the game in the next few moves. That kind of thing. All right, so that's what my board vision is telling me. All right, what's my tactical vision telling me? Well, right now, all the pieces that are attacked are also guarded, but I see a little bit of a tactic. Black's isolated d-pawn is guarded by his queen, his knight, and his bishop. But the queen is guarding the knight, which means if I play bishop takes f6, then if black wants to continue to have 2 pieces guarding the d-pawn, he has to play g takes f6. But that's a pretty terrible opening up of the king and messing up all his pawns in front of the king. And if I play bishop takes f6 and he plays queen takes f6, and white plays knight takes d5, my rook on a1 is guarded, so queen takes a1 is no good. And if he pins my rook to my queen, pins the knight on d5 to the queen on d1 with rook a d8 or something, then knight takes f6 is check, winning the queen. So bishop takes f6. If he plays g takes f6, I'm not winning any material, but I'm opening up his king. If he plays queen takes f6, I might be able to play knight takes d5. Does my tactical vision tell me anything else? Can he trap my knights with g5 or something? No. If I play bishop a3, is that rook on f8 in any danger? No. Knight on f3, completely safe. Pawn on h3, safe. So right now it's a little early to have a lot of tactics, so my tactical vision tells me, other than maybe removing the guard on the d5 pawn, there's not much else going on in terms of tactics. How about visualization? Well, of course, visualization is when we're analyzing, we're looking at things. So I did some visualization on bishop takes f6. I said bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, knight takes d5. I visualized if he plays bishop takes d5, I can play queen takes d5, and my rook on f1 is guarding my rook on a1. I visualized if he plays rook a d8, pinning my knight to my queen, I can play knight takes f6 check, and he doesn't have time to play rook takes d1. So when I was checking out my tactical vision, I was also, of course, using my visualization. Let's go ahead a few moves here. Let's go like 15 moves ahead and see what we can find. I'll make those moves fairly quickly, and we do see the removal of the guard. King takes, there's a pin, he gets out of the pin, he puts up, we'll go up to about move 30. And we'll do it again. Okay, that's black's 30th move. So now we've moved 15 moves ahead. What's my board vision tell me? All right, let's count the material again. Queen, rook, 2 minor pieces and 4 pawns. Queen, rook, 2 minor pieces and 4 pawns. Black has a passed H pawn. White has a passed D pawn. White's centralized knights are very, very powerfully placed. Both sides' kings are a little bit loose. The queen on H5 is attacking the rook on D1. And of course the knight on F6 is pinned by the queen on C3. Okay, so let's switch to our tactical vision. Alright, so the knight on F6 is attacked twice with the knight on D5 and the rook on F8. But the rook on D1 is also hanging. So white has to calculate. He has two possibilities. One is to move the rook and continue to attack the knight. And the other is to take the knight right away, let black take the rook, and get a discovered attack. But if I get a discovered attack with my knight, it's not going to be double check. And he could play, well, can he play bishop d4? No, he can't. I'm using my visualization now because my knight on f5 is guarding it. So let's look at that line. Knight takes f6. He can't play rook takes. That's a disaster. So he has to play queen takes d1 or maybe queen g4 check. Well, he can't play queen g4 check because my visualization tells me the knight on f6 is guarding g4. So knight takes f6, queen takes d1. Can I mate him there with a discovery? If I move my knight to some random square like h5, if he plays king to g8, I have queen g7 mate. But if he plays bishop d4, I can play queen d4 check and trade off my pieces, and I would have two knights against a rook. So let's look at that again. Knight f6, queen d1, knight h5 check, bishop d4, queen takes d4 check. I could also play maybe knight takes d4, but let's look at queen takes d4 check, queen takes d4, knight takes d4, and I've got a knight on d4 and a knight on h6, and he just has a rook. Okay, so my tactical vision tells me that knight takes f6 is probably playable. Let's say I play a move like rook h1 first. Rook h1, if he plays queen g4 check, I can play king h2. If he plays queen h5 check, I can play king g1. If he plays queen d1 check, I play king g2. He plays queen g4 check, and it looks like I have to put a piece in the way to avoid a perpetual check. So rook h1, queen g4 check. If I put my knight on g3 in the way, he has queen takes e4 check also in some lines. All right, so it's looking more like knight takes f6 is better than moving the rook. Although, let's say I move the rook somewhere where queen g4 check doesn't just win something. Let's say I play rook to e1. Rook e1, if queen g4 check, king f1, queen h3 check. Can't play queen h3 check. My queen on c3, my visualization tells me my queen on c3 is guarding. So queen g4 check, rook e1, queen g4 check, king f1. Looks pretty good. The queen can't guard the knight. The bishop can't guard the knight except to go to d4. But if I play rook e1 and he plays queen back to g6 or f7, white's got a fantastic game. Okay, so rook e1 is a move, knight f6 is a move. I believe he'll probably play knight f6. So we're using my tactical vision and, of course, my visualization to see what's going on. Let's see what Mamedyarov played. He did play knight f6. That's what I thought. If that works, then that's the best. So queen takes d1 is forced. Now the question is, where is he going to put the knight? I said h5, but he doesn't have to play h5. He can play knight to d7 check and attack the rook. So let's look at that. Knight to d7 check. King to g8 still allows queen g7 mate. Bishop d4. Well, then if I play queen takes d4, and he plays queen takes d4, queen takes d4, knight takes d4, he has rook d8 forking my knights. So that's probably maybe not the best place to put my knight. If I could take the rook, it'd be better. I assume he's going to put the knight somewhere else other than d7. Let's see what he does. Wow. He doesn't play the discovery at all. He just threatens queen g7 mate and says, go ahead and try to stop that, Mr. Black. So that's a pretty good tactical vision by Mamedyarov, because his move is kind of a quiet move, and quiet moves are the hardest moves to see. Let's see if Black resigned here. And he did. Because if he plays rook to g8, then knight takes g8 and he still has all the same problems. But how else can he stop queen g7 mate? All right. Jonathan Levitt wrote a book called Genius in Chess, where he gave people a bunch of board vision problems. And he gave it to people rated very high. And my guess was that above a certain level, people's board vision didn't get a lot better. That, you know, if you get people above 23, 2400, they all have fantastically good board vision. But what International Master Levitt found when he tested people was that there was a difference in board vision between people as you got higher, which tells you how unbelievably important board vision is. So, for instance, let me show you one of the puzzles that he gave people, and you can take the puzzle by pausing the video after I tell you what you need to do. Let me bring up number 31. Examine %31. All right, in this puzzle, you're supposed to find two numbers. The first number is how many legal moves white has, and the second number is how many of those legal moves are checkmate in one move. So you want to time yourself and give me two numbers. You know, when I say ready, set, go, you hit pause on the video, time yourself, come up with two numbers. You say there's 375 legal moves for white, of which 17 are checkmate or whatever. You want those two numbers. All right, so if you want to try it, go ahead, pause the video, give me the two numbers. Okay, how do we find the two numbers? Well, the first thing we want to ask ourselves is, how many white pieces can move here? Well, it turns out there's only four. The knight on e3 can move, the rook on d2 can move, the bishop on b3 can move, and the queen on a3 can move. A knight in the middle of the board, as we saw in one of our earlier videos comparing the knight to the bishop, has 8 legal moves unless there's a white piece on one of the squares, or unless he's pinned or something like that. Here, all 8 squares are available. So that knight has 8 moves. Okay. Now let's check how many moves the rook has. The rook can go in 4 directions. 2 moves in this direction, 2 moves in that direction, 1 move in that direction, 6 moves in that direction, 2 and 1 and 1 and 6 is 10. So he has 10 moves. The bishop has 5 moves in this direction, 2 moves in this direction, that's 7. The queen has 2 moves in this direction, 2 moves in that direction. So the total number of moves that white has is 7. 4 for the queen, 7 for the bishop, that's 11. 10 for the rook is 21. 8 for the knight is 29. So let's bring this position back without all the arrows on it. All right, so he has 29 moves. Notice the knight on c6 can't move, it's pinned to the king. The pawn on f4 can't move, it's pinned to the king. How many of the 29 are checkmate? Well, turns out every one of the 29 is checkmate. For instance, queen to b4 is checkmate. The king can't take the queen because it's guarded by the knight, even though the knight is pinned to the king, because the rules of chess say that a piece that's guarded by a piece that's pinned to the king still can't be captured by a king. How did they come up with that rule? They came up with that rule by saying, let's allow people to play one more move and see who would take the king first. Well, if the black king were able to take the queen on b4 and we allowed people to capture kings, then the knight would capture the black king first before the black bishop on b7 would capture the king on e4. So let's make it legal that the queen can go to b4 and be guarded by the knight. So it turns out they could have made the rules otherwise, but they made it consistent with that kind of idea. So here, queen b4 is checkmate, and so are the other 28 moves. So International Master Levitt gave this position and many similar ones to a bunch of very wide-rated players, but even a bunch of strong players. And what he found is that people he timed them and he checked their accuracy. So you want to do both when you're doing these tests. You want to penalize people for wrong answers, for how wrong their answer is. So he would time them and he would check their answers and their accuracy, and he would create a little scoring algorithm. And what he found was that people at 2700 had better board vision than people at 2600. People at 2600 had better board vision than people at 2500, and so on. Now, is this the chicken or the egg? Which comes first? Does it come first that you get better and then your board vision improves, or does it come first that your board vision improves and it makes you better? I think it's more the latter than the former, which is if you can improve your board vision, you'll become a better player because you'll become aware of more things, and you can grok the whole board in one look, so to speak, to borrow a term from Stranger in a Strange Land. Grok means to not only see but completely understand and filter it into your consciousness, so to speak. So if you can look at a position and see all 64 squares and completely understand what's going on very quickly, that helps make you a much, much better player. Your visualization will help your board vision will help your visualization. It'll help your tactical vision. It'll help your awareness of strategy. It'll help everything. So board vision is very important. Two of the books I like on board vision are the two books by Jeff Coakley called Winning Chess Puzzles for Kids Volume 1, and even more fun is Winning Chess Puzzles for Kids Volume 2 by Jeff Coakley. And those books are not really for kids. They've got some wonderful problems in. And if you go back to my video that I did a while ago on puzzles that don't necessarily occur in games, this is another one of them. Nobody puts you in a game and says, tell me how many legal moves you have and how many are checkmate. They just say, find the best move you can. But the ability to do these things turns out to be very important, just like I mentioned in that previous video. So doing these kind of exercises is very helpful. So the three books I just mentioned were Genius in Chess by International Master Levitt, Winning Chess Puzzles for Kids Volume 1 by Jeff Coakley, and Winning Chess Puzzles for Kids Volume 2 by Jeff Coakley. All right, let's go back and pick one more random World Open game and see what our three visions will tell us, and then we'll call it a day or call it a video. Examine World Cup 19, what number should I pick? Percent, I don't know, 88 keys in a piano. Let's pick 88. 88, Gupta against Karabov. Last time we went to move 15, let's go to move 15 again. That's still kind of early in the opening for a grandmaster. Okay. We expect on move 15 that maybe the material is still going to be even, but I guess not. Okay. So black has just played queen takes c4. And so let's count. White has 5 pawns and black has 6 pawns. Black's d-pawn is hanging though. White has the bishop pair. Black can take the bishop with check on the next move if he wants to. So the material is black has an extra pawn for the bishop pair, but my board vision tells me that that's not going to last very long. The pawn at a2 is also hanging. White has a rook on the open b file. The b file and c file are open. Both sides have 2 pawn islands. The knight on d4 is an outpost, but it's attacked 3 times. It's guarded 3 times by the queen on c4, the pawn on e5, and indirectly with the bishop on g7. Both sides are castled. Both sides' kings are relatively safe. The rook on b1 is the only rook doing anything. The knight on e7 is hanging, but white, it's in no danger. Okay, so tactical vision. Well, we already started on that a little bit. White can take the pawn on d6 and attack the queen. Black can answer that by taking the bishop on f3 check if he wants to win the bishop pair, or he can just move the queen. For instance, queen takes a2. So that is all possible. Can black threat, if black plays knight e2 check, that's not safe. The bishop and the queen are at guarding that. If the white knight takes on d6, can the white knight be trapped on d6? Well, the b5 square is guarded twice by the queen and the knight on d4, but the b7 square is not attacked by black, and it's guarded by the white rook on b1. So after knight takes d6, if black attacks the knight with a move like queen c6, white probably could just play knight to b7 if worse comes to worse. course, white can always throw in bishop takes d4 at some point if he's worried that the knight on d4 is guarding too many squares like that. And if he does play bishop takes d4 at some point, he could isolate that pawn. So for instance, white might have an idea like bishop takes d4, e takes d4, knight takes d6, queen takes a2, and then e5 with a discovered attack on the rook on a8. The problem with playing a line like that is the bishop on g7 is now attacking the pawn on e5, my visualization is telling me. And after the rook on e8 saves himself, I have to worry about how am I going to guard that pawn on e5. That may not be so easy in that position. So white's got a number of moves here. I wouldn't necessarily call them tactics. I mean, black has just won a pawn, and white's going to try to either win back a pawn or get some good play for his pawn. And, you know, he has, as I said, he has really maybe two ways of doing that. He could play bishop takes d4 first or play knight takes d6. I don't see that he has any other wonderful tactical moves that give him a chance to get something for that pawn he just gave up on c4. Okay, so again, you know, we see me in all these cases, when I go to my tactical vision, I have to start using my visualization to see if the tactical vision really works. Because there's no way, once I get past the static part of the tactical vision to see that the pawn on d6 is hanging, that I can figure out whether taking it's any good or not. That requires visualization. All right, and let's go another 15 moves ahead. Bishop takes, pawn takes, knight takes. He did not take the a2 pawn. Knight to b5, rook guards the pawn, offers a trade at queens, no thank you. A pawn, he sacks. We're going to go up to move 30, do it one more time and call it a video. Attacks the queen, gives up the pawn, moves the rook. Bishop comes back, rook gets to the 7th rank, bishop d3. Double attacks the rook and the queen. Trade off, trade, okay. So we have to go one move ahead here. All right, so let's see what my board vision tells me here. Both sides have two rooks and a minor piece. There's pawns on both sides of the board, although black's pawn on the queen side is in the center. When there's pawns on both sides, the bishop's pretty good. But white has the outside pass pawn. He's got a pawn on a2. Black's got the pawn on d4. White has some back rank mate difficulties if he takes the rook off b1, so he has to do something. If he wants to activate that rook, he's got to do something about his back rank. The a2 pawn is the outside pass pawn. Obviously, the a2 pawn is passed and the d4 pawn is passed. And they're both, of course, isolated pawns. White's blockading the isolated pawn on d4 with the rook. All right, let's look at some dynamics. The pawn on d4 is attacked twice and it's guarded twice. The pawn on a2 is attacked once and not guarded at all. So if white does nothing, black will play rook takes a2. So what would white probably play here? Well, he can play a3 and let the knight guard the pawn and the rook on d3 guard the pawn. He can play a4 and get the pawn moving and put the pawn on the opposite color of the bishop, but then the rook could go behind the passed pawn. He could put his rook on a1 to go behind the passed pawn to help push the pawn up the board afterwards. And then he might play something like g3 in the near future to try to create luft for his king. You want to create luft on g2 because it's the opposite color of the bishop. On the other hand, black would love to attack f2 with a couple rooks and a bishop, but it's not quite so easy. He could play, like if white plays rook to a1, black could try rook to d5, attacking the knight on b5, and if the knight moves, or white saves the knight somehow, he could play rook f5, attacking the f2 square, so that's all possible. So again, I'm using my tactical ideas with my visualization to try to figure out what things might happen here. All right, let's play over the rest of the game. We'll call it a video. White does play a4. Black does put his rook behind the pawn. White says, okay, where are you going? Black says, I'll just go behind my pawn, or in front of my pawn. Both sides push their pawns. Black says, if you take my rook, I'll try to get a queen. White says, I guess not. Black says, but then I can take the knight. White says, all right, but I'm threatening to get a queen with my pawn, and I'm going to stop the back rank mates with your Black says, all right, I'll just guard there. White pushes the pawn. Black stops it. So black's just up a piece now. Black should win. White plays his g3 move, but it's too late. That rook to b2 tactic hit the rook and the knight on b5. Black says, what are you going to do, Mr. White? White says, I'll trade pawns. Black says, no problem. I can win an endgame with all the pawns on one side with an extra bishop. It's trivial. White says, I'm not going to resign. Black says, but I'm a 2679 player. You can't do this. White says, watch me. Black says, this isn't going to be hard. And now White says, trade rooks or you lose the g3 pawn. But if you lose the g3 pawn, it's all over. If you trade rooks, it's all over. So this should be a resigning move. Let's see. Nope, he checked them. I forgot he could throw in a check. Black will just run his king around to the h file, which he does, and now White resigns. All right, hope you enjoyed today's video for my YouTube series. This was the 3 types of chess vision, which are board vision, tactical vision, and visualization. If you liked it, you can subscribe, pass the word. This is National Master Dan Heisman. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.